Where does genius end and madness truly begin? History tells us that some of the most intelligent minds also walk closest to the edge of darkness. Tonight's story is not a legend. It is not fiction. It is real and deeply disturbing. This is the story of a man praised as a linguistic genius, a respected historian, and a cemetery expert, who hid one of the most horrifying secrets ever discovered inside his own home. In 2011, police officers stepped into what appeared to be an ordinary apartment in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia. The building was quiet. The neighbors suspected nothing. But inside this small, cluttered space, investigators would encounter a scene so surreal that many of them would later describe it as something out of a nightmare.
Check behind that door.
It's clear. Keep moving. Stay alert.
Something they could never forget. Scattered throughout the apartment were 26 life-sized figures. They sat on chairs. They stood against walls. Some even faced the television. At first glance, they looked like oversized, handmade dolls. But something felt wrong. Their proportions were too human. Their presence felt heavy. As investigators moved closer, the truth emerged. These were not dolls. They were mummified human bodies. Children. Girls between the ages of 3 and 12. Exhumed from cemeteries. Preserved. Dressed, and kept as companions inside this apartment. The man responsible was Anatoly Moskvin. Soft-spoken, thin, intelligent-looking. Nothing about his appearance suggested violence or cruelty. He did not fit the image of a criminal. In fact, many who knew him described him as polite, shy, and deeply intellectual. A man who lived almost entirely inside his own thoughts. Moskvin was a respected academic, a historian, a linguist fluent in 13 languages. He specialized in Celtic culture, ancient rituals, and forgotten traditions. He published hundreds of articles, books, and translations. To his peers, he was eccentric, but brilliant. No one imagined that his greatest research subject was not history, but death itself. Among all his interests, one stood above the rest: cemeteries. Moskvin studied them obsessively. He walked through them for hours, recording inscriptions, layouts, and symbols. He even invented a title for himself, necropolist, an expert on the cities of the dead. For him, cemeteries were not places of mourning, but places of connection. According to Moskvin, his obsession began at the age of 13. On his way home from school, he encountered a funeral procession for an 11-year-old girl named Natasha. What happened next would become the foundation of his entire belief system, one he would carry for the rest of his life. Moskvin later claimed that mourners forced him to kiss the dead girl, that her mother placed rings on both their fingers, symbolically marrying them. Whether this truly happened remains uncertain, but Moskvin believed it with absolute conviction. To him, it was not trauma, it was destiny. From that moment on, death no longer frightened Moskvin. It fascinated him. He believed the dead were not gone, only waiting for someone who cared enough to listen. And in his mind, that someone was him. As an adult, Moskvin visited more than 700 cemeteries across Russia. He memorized their layouts, their security weaknesses, which graves were abandoned, which families had stopped visiting. What began as academic research slowly transformed into something far more dangerous. Moskvin did not choose randomly. He targeted graves of young girls, usually recently buried, often forgotten. For him, these were not corpses. They were children who had been abandoned and needed saving. At night, Moskvin worked alone, digging silently under cover of darkness, opening coffins, removing bodies. In his mind, he was not committing a crime. He was rescuing souls from loneliness. Using household materials, Moskvin mummified the bodies. Salt, baking soda, improvised methods learned through obsession and experimentation. Each step was done carefully, patiently, almost tenderly. He dressed them in colorful clothes, styled their hair, applied makeup, turning death into something resembling life. To Moskvin, this was not desecration. It was care. Some were given button eyes so they could see, so they could watch cartoons, so they would not feel alone. Moskvin celebrated birthdays, held tea parties, spoke to them every day. In his world, these were not bodies. They were his children. He believed science, or magic, would one day revive them. Until then, they waited, preserved, protected, loved. If this story grips you, subscribe now, because everything is about to collapse. For more than a decade, Moskvin's secret remained hidden, until a single coincidence brought the police to his door and revealed a horror no one was prepared for. In 2011, Russia was on edge. A recent terrorist attack in Moscow had pushed security forces into a state of high alert. Police were responding to every suspicious report with urgency. It was during this tense atmosphere that a strange call came in from Nizhny Novgorod. Gravestones were being vandalized, photographs painted over. At first, it seemed like simple desecration. No one imagined it was the final thread leading to a far darker truth. Police patrols were sent to investigate several cemeteries. That is where they found Anatoly Moskvin, alone, walking calmly among the graves. He showed no fear, no panic. When questioned, he confidently introduced himself as a cemetery researcher, a necropolist. He claimed he was documenting vandalism, not causing it. At that moment, officers saw nothing more than an eccentric academic wandering among the dead. Moskvin did not resist. He did not flee. He calmly answered questions, citing his research and academic background. To the officers, he appeared cooperative and harmless. But something about him lingered in their minds. His familiarity with the cemetery, his confidence, the way he spoke of graves not as resting places, but as homes. It was enough to justify a closer look. Given the heightened security alert, police decided to follow protocol. Moskvin's apartment would be searched. It was meant to be routine, a formality. No one expected what lay behind that door. When Moskvin handed over the keys without hesitation, officers later recalled a strange feeling, as if he believed nothing he had done was wrong. The apartment door opened to a cramped space overflowing with books. Stacks rose from the floor to the ceiling, ancient texts, academic journals, handwritten notes. At first glance, it looked like the home of a scholar consumed by knowledge. But as officers stepped further inside, their attention was drawn away from the books, toward the figures silently watching them. They were everywhere, sitting on chairs, standing beside shelves, lined against walls. Each one dressed differently, bright clothes, carefully arranged. At first, the officers assumed they were mannequins or handmade dolls. But standing so close to them, the air felt different, too quiet, too heavy. As one officer brushed against a figure, something shifted. The weight, the texture, the unnatural rigidity. That was the moment realization struck. These were not dolls. They were human remains, preserved, styled, and arranged as if still alive. Seasoned officers later admitted that nothing in their careers had prepared them for this sight. Then, something even more disturbing happened. When one of the figures was touched, a faint melody played. A music box, hidden inside the chest cavity. The sound was muffled, broken, childlike, echoing softly through the room. In that moment, the apartment stopped feeling like a crime scene and began to feel like a nightmare. Perhaps the most unsettling detail came later. Moskvin did not live alone. He shared the apartment with his elderly parents. They claimed they believed the figures were simply large dolls, a strange hobby, nothing more. Whether this was denial, ignorance, or fear remains unanswered. But the truth had existed under their roof for years. When questioned, Moskvin showed no remorse. He spoke calmly, clearly. He insisted the children were not dead, only waiting. He claimed he had rescued them from loneliness, warmed them, loved them. To him, the horror uncovered by police was not a crime. It was an act of care and belief. Moskvin repeatedly referred to the mummified bodies as his children. He spoke their names, their birthdays, the clothes he chose for them. He described tea parties, cartoons, and conversations. To him, these were not memories or fantasies. They were daily routines. Listening to him, detectives understood that Moskvin was not pretending. He truly believed these children were still part of life. Moskvin revealed another detail. He had wanted children of his own. He had applied for adoption, but his applications were
rejected due to low income and unstable living conditions. For most people, rejection would have meant disappointment. For Moskvin, it became justification. In his mind, society had denied him children, so he found them where no one else was looking. Moskvin insisted he never acted without permission. Before disturbing any grave, he claimed to communicate with the child's spirit. He said he asked if they wished to return home. Only when he felt an answer, a sign, would he dig. To investigators, this confirmed what they already suspected. Moskvin's actions were guided not by logic or law, but by delusion, shaped through belief. As a scholar of Celtic traditions, Moskvin referenced ancient rituals. He spoke of druids who slept on graves to communicate with spirits. To him, these were not myths. They were instructions. Ancient wisdom misunderstood by modern society. In his mind, he was continuing a sacred tradition, one that blurred the boundary between the living and the dead. Legally, investigators faced a dilemma. Moskvin had not killed anyone. There was no murder weapon, no act of violence against the living. But 26 graves had been violated. Families had mourned beside empty coffins without knowing. This was not a conventional crime. It was something far more disturbing, a violation of memory, grief, and trust. Psychiatrists were called in to evaluate Moskvin. After extensive examinations, the diagnosis was clear: paranoid schizophrenia, a condition marked by delusions, distorted beliefs, and a fractured sense of reality. To doctors, Moskvin did not understand the moral or emotional weight of his actions. He was not acting with malice. He was acting within a world only he could see. Because of this diagnosis, Moskvin was not sent to prison. Instead, he was committed to a high-security psychiatric hospital. There would be no fixed sentence, no release date, only treatment and evaluation. For some, this felt like justice denied. For others, it was the only possible outcome. The question lingered: was he a criminal or a patient? For the families, no diagnosis could ease the pain. Some had visited their daughters' graves for years, unaware the coffins were empty. They learned the truth only when police called them in.
The shock was devastating. Grief returned, stronger, darker, and crueler than before. For them, Moskvin's explanations meant nothing. Only loss remained. Moskvin's case divided society. Some saw a monster who desecrated innocence. Others saw a severely ill man who needed treatment, not punishment. There were no easy answers, only discomfort, only questions. If stories like this challenge how you see the human mind, subscribe now, because the darkest reflections are still ahead. Inside the psychiatric hospital, Moskvin's life became quiet and controlled. No cemeteries, no dolls, no rituals. Doctors described him as calm, cooperative, and intellectually sharp. He continued,
Reading, writing, and discussing history. To outsiders, he appeared almost normal. But behind that calm surface, doctors believed the same delusional structures still existed, merely dormant, not erased. In 2015, doctors made a controversial statement. They suggested Moskvin's schizophrenia was in remission, that he no longer posed a danger, that he could potentially be released. The report shocked investigators, and it terrified the families. How could a man who lived with 26 corpses be considered safe? The question echoed far beyond the hospital walls. News of possible release spread quickly. Public outrage followed. Parents of the victims spoke out. Citizens protested. For many, the idea of Moskvin walking free felt unbearable. This was not about punishment anymore. It was about fear. Fear that obsession, untreated or misunderstood, could return. Quietly, patiently, and unnoticed. Ultimately, the decision rested with a judge. After reviewing the case, the court ruled that Moskvin remained unfit for society. Treatment would continue, indefinitely. There would be no release, no second chance. For the families, this was not relief, but a fragile sense of safety. The fear never fully disappeared. One mother, Natalia Chartimova, spoke words that captured the pain of many. She said Moskvin brought terror into her life, that knowing he would remain hospitalized was the only comfort she had left. Her daughter's coffin had been empty for years. She had mourned a grave that held nothing. No diagnosis could undo that damage. Legally, Moskvin had never killed anyone. That fact complicated everything. There was no murder charge, only grave desecration. Yet the emotional impact rivaled the worst crimes imaginable. He stole bodies, but also stole closure, stole peace, stole the finality that death is supposed to bring. Moskvin's intelligence made the case even harder to process. He was not ignorant, not confused in a simple way. He was highly educated, articulate, and methodical. This challenged the comforting belief that monsters are obvious. Sometimes, obsession wears the face of intelligence. Sometimes, madness speaks in perfect sentences. Moskvin's story is often compared to Karl Tanzler's, another man who refused to let go of the dead. But unlike Tanzler, Moskvin received no sympathy. There was no tragic romance here. Only children, only graves. Only a boundary crossed so far that empathy collapsed under its weight. So what is justice in a case like this? Punishment? Treatment? Isolation? Moskvin exists in a space where law, medicine, and morality collide. If he is sick, how long must he be confined? If he is dangerous, can he ever truly be cured? There are no clear answers, only uneasy compromises. More than anything, Moskvin's story is a warning, a reminder of how obsession can grow unnoticed, how intelligence can rationalize the unthinkable, how society often overlooks quiet isolation. By the time the truth emerges, the damage is already done, and no explanation feels sufficient. The true victims of this story are easy to forget amid analysis and debate. 26 children, lives already lost once, then taken again. Their names rarely remembered, their stories overshadowed by the man who stole them. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is how easily victims disappear behind infamous names. Today, the cemeteries Moskvin once walked are quiet again, graves repaired, photos restored. But silence does not mean healing. For families, every visit carries a new weight, not just grief, but violation. A trust broken in the one place meant to be sacred. Moskvin remains in the hospital, a man frozen between worlds, neither fully criminal nor fully free. His mind still filled with history, rituals, and beliefs. Whether he feels regret remains unclear. What is certain is that society chose containment over forgiveness, and caution over closure. And so the question returns: was Anatoly Moskvin a monster, or a deeply broken man failed by the systems around him? Is madness an explanation, or merely a label? Each answer feels incomplete, each conclusion uncomfortable. Perhaps that is why this story refuses to fade. We tell stories like this not for shock alone, but to understand where boundaries lie and what happens when they disappear. To recognize warning signs, to question how society responds to mental illness, and to remember the cost of looking away. Some horrors scream, others whisper. Moskvin's story is the latter, quiet, patient, hidden behind intelligence and routine. And that may be what makes it truly terrifying. So now we ask you, where do you draw the line? Between genius and madness, between illness and evil, between explanation and excuse. There is no safe answer, only the one you can live with. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more deep, unsettling true stories. And remember, sometimes the darkest places are not hidden underground, but inside the human mind. Thank you for watching. Until the next dark tale.